Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, this is my son Michael, and today I am talking to you about the 2020 Goodreads Choice Awards. So this was last year's awards. And over the past year, I have been reading the winners and then some in almost all of the categories. I did not read from 5 categories, but almost all of them, and I'm gonna let you know what I thought about the books that I read. Now, this is mostly like, are the winners worth it in these categories, in my personal opinion, because I read varying amounts in each category. So let's start from the top in the order that Goodreads gives us, and that is fiction. I read 4 books from the fiction category. The winner, which was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I read the number 4 pick, which was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. The number 7 pick, which was Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jossi, and The Death of Vivek OG by Akwaeke Emeze, which was number 17. So this category actually was really good to me. I gave Midnight Library, Such a Fun Age, and The Death of Vivek OG 4 stars. I gave Transcendent Kingdom 3 stars, which I think more people would like Transcendent Kingdom, but it was very math-based and science-based and animal experiment-based, which is not my personal favorite thing to read about. So it got lower for me, but I think it's a very well-written book. Do I think that The Midnight Library was the best book that I read? No. I still think it was The Death of Vivek OG, which was actually the lowest rated of all of them. But I do recommend all 4 of these books if they sound interesting to you. The next category was mystery and thriller, and surprisingly, I read 4 of them. I feel like normally I don't like mystery thrillers, but I actually really liked some of these, so who knows. The winner was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was by far my least favorite of all the ones that I read. Then I had Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, which I gave 4 stars at the time, but I'd probably bump that down to a 3-star in hindsight. Then number 3 was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James, which I loved and I gave 4 stars. And then number 4, which is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which I gave 5 stars. So When No One Is Watching is the one that I thought was the best, but I would recommend that and The Sundown Motel. So When No One Is Watching is a very slow burn thriller where you can experience the everyday fear of being a person of color, which I have never experienced, and this tells the story so well that it's just one of those things where I can't imagine not being able to call the police. But a huge portion of our like country can't call the police for protection or for help because the police are going to target them instead of the person or people they should be targeting. So I really, really enjoyed that. The Sundown Motel is fantastic as well, but that's like paranormal thriller, and there are actual paranormal aspects in that. The Home Before Dark and The Guest List, The Guest List was awful. All of the characters were awful. So if you like thrillers where you hate all the characters, you might like The Guest List. And then Home Before Dark was just kind of a fun story, but it wasn't, like, in hindsight of reading these other books, it was just kind of like oh yeah, that was fun, but nothing, like, amazing. Next category is historical fiction, and I read 3 books in this category. The winner was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Number 6 was The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. And number 7 was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I gave both The Vanishing Half and Hamnet 4 stars, and I gave The Pull of the Stars 3 stars, though I actually think I'd bump it up to 4 stars now because it's been a while since I read it and I still remember it. I thought they were all like really good stories in completely unique ways. So The Vanishing Half is about, I guess, passing, where it's a community of very, very light-skinned black people, and it follows two twins, and one of them lives her life as a white woman and one of them lives her life as a black woman, and it kind of follows them and their daughters, and it's a very just unique and interesting story that I very much enjoyed. The Pull of the Stars is about the flu after World War I believe, the Spanish flu in Ireland, and it just follows like a couple of days in the life of a nurse in an Irish hospital dealing with the Spanish flu. And then Hamnet is about Hamlet, or Shakespeare's son, Shakespeare's family. It is not about Shakespeare. He is the only unnamed character in the entire book, though it's obviously about Shakespeare. But it's a fictional telling of like the rest of his family, which you never hear about. Which do I think is the best book? I actually think the winner of this one is probably the best book, which is The Vanishing Half. So this one, the winner did it. Next category is fantasy, and I dedicate an entire month to reading the entirety of fantasy. So for that, I am going to redirect you to the video I made talking about my rankings and everything like that last November. I'll put it up in the eye up there. Romance, I skipped. I hate contemporary romance, so I knew that I would not be fair to this. I did read The Winner from Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout and gave it 5 stars, but that is fantasy romance, which I do like. But this was the only fantasy romance on the entire list, so it didn't feel fair knowing that I like the fantasy romance genre and I hate contemporary romance as a general rule, to go through and read some contemporary romance that I'm just really not going to enjoy. So for 2021, the romance category is kind of be up in the air depending on if there's a significant amount of fantasy romance on that list. If there's not, I won't read it. If there is, I will. And if there's a bunch of fantasy romance but the winner is contemporary, then I will read the winner and then the fantasy romance on there. The next category is science fiction, which I read almost as much science fiction as I do fantasy, but I read 6 of these. To be fair, I read like 20 of the fantasy, so maybe I don't read as much science fiction as I do fantasy. Anyway, I read The Winner, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I read number 2, Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Number 3, Network Effect by Martha Wells. Number 4, The Space Between Worlds by Micah Johnson. Number 8, Riot Baby by Tochi Omnibuchi, and number 20, The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal. Okay, so the winner was To Sleep in the Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, which I gave 3 stars, but I did not like the Aragon series by him. I don't think he's a very good writer, personally. I thought that book was way too long-winded and way too redundant, but it wasn't like the worst thing I'd ever read. So I don't recommend that unless you're just a super fan of the author. But I just don't think it's worth how many pages it is. Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir is the second book in a series. It's awful compared to the first book. But I still want to continue the series. But it's weird. It's so hard to follow. And it's hard to follow for a purpose, but it is really hard to follow. Network Effect by Martha Wells is just one of the Murderbot books, and I fucking adore Murderbot. So, highly recommend. That's 5 star. Space Between Worlds, awesome. Awesome book about poverty and being a person of color, but in a sci-fi universe. Highly recommend that. Riot Baby, I didn't understand. It is another book about being a person of color, but like I did not understand what was going on in that book, so I can't really recommend it. And then The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal is the third book in her Lady Astronaut series, which I highly recommend that series. So for me, I think Network Effect is going to be the winner, followed closely by The Relentless Moon. Then The Space Between Worlds, and then To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, not worth it. Riot Baby, ask somebody else's opinion on it, not mine. And then Harrow the Ninth, only if you actually want to complete that series, but I wouldn't really just recommend it for the sake of itself. Next category was horror, and I weirdly read 5 horror books. I didn't expect that. I expected to have like 4 of the categories I really like, a lot of sci-fi, and then like 2 of the categories that I don't normally read, right? So 5 horror books. The winner was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I don't like Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing, so maybe read other people's reviews on that. I gave it a 3-star. It wasn't like the worst thing I ever read. She and I just don't get along as like reader and writer, though a lot of people really seem to like it. Then there was the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires at number 3 by Grady Hendrix. I gave that 4 stars. It was fantastic, though uncomfortably dark at points. Then The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones at number 5, which I also gave 4 stars. That was fantastic. It's about a Native American reservation and like a elk lady that was just super fucking creepy. Then at number 8, I read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth, which I gave 3 stars. I just felt like that book didn't really have a plot, but if you really like sad queer women, the characterizations are fantastic in that one. And then at number 13, I read Lakewood by Megan Giddings, which I gave 4 stars. That was like fucked up science experiment stuff, and it was really fucked up. So for this one, I think it's kind of a tie between The Only Good Indians and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. The winner is the book that I liked the least. So do with that what you will. Next category was humor, which I skipped because I don't particularly like things that are labeled as humor. I don't think they're funny. So yeah, I just skipped the humor category. Then we come to nonfiction, where I read 2 of the nonfiction choices. First, the winner, Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, which I gave 5 stars. That was one of the top books that I read this entire year. It's a remixed book on racism aimed at like young adults, like high school kids, and it's the history of being Black aimed at a younger audience, and I think it does a wonderful job of being like understandable and relatable. The other one was another 5 stars. So the 2 books that I picked in the nonfiction section were like both fantastic, and that was Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. This is just about being the intersectionality of being Black and being feminist, because a lot of feminist rhetoric leaves out Black women. It's just white feminist rhetoric, and this book was just well written, easily conversational, and not really academic, and I highly recommend both books. Honestly, just 100% blanket recommend both of those books. Next section was memoir, and again I read 2. I read the winner, A Promised Land by Barack Obama, which I'm going to be honest, unless you were honestly interested in Barack Obama's political career, there is no fucking point in reading this book. It's like an 800-page book, and I could give 2 shits about Barack Obama's political career. If you're gonna read it just because you feel like you need to read it, but you don't want to read it, grab this as an audiobook. That's how I consumed it, and it was easily consumable and narrated by former President Barack Obama. The other book I read was All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson. I think this is a very good book for Black queer young men, but not necessarily anybody who is not a male or who is not a gay male. This is not going to give you any insight on anything else in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. It is specifically targeted towards Black gay men. But it was a good read, and if you were interested in learning more about the singular experience of one Black gay man, then I recommend it. Next up was History and Biography, and the winner was Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, which I thought was a good book, but it was written a little bit too academically for my taste. So, good, but kind of boring to consume. And then the other one I read was Wandering in Strange Lands by Morgan Jerkin, and I really, really liked this one. It's like her family history, and I had lived in a lot of the places that she was talking about, so I felt like very attached to the information she was giving in this book. But I don't know that if you didn't live in like South Carolina or Oklahoma, or the other places that she talks about in these books, that you would really feel the same like enjoyment of this book as I did. I would look at other people's reviews and see what they say, but I thought this was really cool, and I was glad to learn about more cultures from places that I had lived previously in my life. Next category is Science and Technology, and the winner was A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough, which, obviously that won. Nothing had a chance to beat something narrated and written by Sir David Attenborough. It just wasn't gonna happen. So, cheat category, I guess, but I highly, highly recommend this book, especially on audiobook. And then the other one I read was How to Argue with a Racist by Adam Rutherford. It's under the science and technology category, so this is a very scientific book, which was boring, and you're not actually going to get any arguments out of this book. Like, if you're talking to a racist and you try to argue the things into this book, or if you're talking to a racist and you're trying to argue the things in this book with said racist, you're not going to get anywhere, because they're all too stupid to understand like the concepts in this book. And it's very involved, which is why there's a whole book about it. So it's kind of an interesting read if you want for your own self to like scientifically disprove the idea of race, but the title is misleading in my opinion. Next category was Food and Cookbooks, which I skipped. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to read those, and I don't really cook. So next, which was Graphic Novels and Comics. The winner, as pretty much every year, is the current Heartstopper, which is Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. I think these novels are very cute, but they're kind of like right down the middle of the road, where I always give them 3 stars, but I always read them every single year because they're adorable, but they're not really meant for me. This is about 2 boys. One is openly queer and one is questioning, and then they blossom into a relationship across the books. The other book I read was the number 2 spot, which is Fangs by Sarah Anderson, and this one's a little bit more up my alley, where this is about a vampire and a werewolf who start dating and fall in love. And it's evilly adorable, which is kind of my aesthetic. The next category was poetry, and this is another category that I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be reading next year, because this was super unsuccessful for me. The winner was Dearly by Margaret Atwood, which I didn't get anything from the poems. If you like Margaret Atwood and you really, really like her storytelling and her writing, this is just more Margaret Atwood, which is fine, but it wasn't anything special to me. The other one I read was Poems for the End of the World by Katie Wismere, who is a booktuber that I follow. This one again this one felt a little childishly emo to me, where it felt like a high schooler kind of woe is me type thing, where I thought it was a little too immature for my personal taste. And I didn't care for either one of them, and this is like the one category where I have absolutely no winner, because I gave them both 3 stars. They were both fine. There wasn't anything inherently wrong with either of them. Neither one of them were for me. Next category was debut novel, and I read 3 of them. The winner was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, which I gave 4 stars. Number 9, The Bone Shard's Daughter by Andrea Stewart, which I gave 3 stars. And then number 18 was Raybearer by Jordan A. Fueco, which I gave 4 stars. I think the winner for me is Raybearer, but it is fantasy sci-fi, which is more my genre than Such a Fun Age, which is just like general fiction. Though Such a Fun Age was a very, very, very good book. So I recommend both Raybearer and Such a Fun Age. I thought The Bone Shard's Daughter was good, and I do plan to continue reading the series, but it just didn't stand out, and it's not as memorable as the other 2. Next category is young adult general fiction, which I read 2 of them. Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo and Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. Now, Clap When You Land is the winner, obvious winner for me, because Grown is something I got in a book box, and I only read it because it came in a book box, but it's about grooming a 17-year-old girl, like a famous, like 30-ish year old rapper grooming a 17-year-old girl, and that just disgusted me all around. I can admit that it was a beautifully written book and so well written and so intense, but I hated the subject matter so much that it was never going to get a high rating from me. But if it's something that you can stomach reading about, this was wonderfully told. Clap When You Land is a novel in verse by Elizabeth Acevedo about 2 sisters who have the same father, but they don't know that the other one exists until their father dies in a plane crash, and then it's kind of like them discovering each other. Fantastically written. I highly recommend the audiobook on that one. Next category is young adult sci-fi and fantasy, and this is the last category that I have read. I read 9 of these, which is kind of impressive considering I keep telling myself I don't like young adult fantasy, but I kept reading it because people keep recommending it to me. So the winner was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, which I hated that series, so out the door with that. Then the next one was number 3, Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. This is my winner. This book I don't feel like is actually young adult. I guess it is, but there are kind of like sex scenes in it. So it's new adult, and I wouldn't let your younger, actually, who am I to say, parent your own children as you will, but this does have some like marriage and graphic scenes to it. Next up was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. I guess this is young adult. It doesn't feel like young adult, and I read everything by Brandon Sanderson, so I love this. This was 4 stars. Next up was Girl Serpent Thorn by Militia Bashardoust. I did really like this, but the more time I spend away from it, the less I remember about it. But I remember it being like a really uniquely fun story about a cursed girl whose touch is deathly poisonous. So if the plot of that one sounds good to you, I did enjoy the story. Next up was A Song of Race and Ruin by Roxane Brown, which I did enjoy that story, but I don't know if I enjoyed it enough to continue with the series. I'm still waffling on that one, but I did think it was interesting concept, well written, but definitely young adult on that one. Next up was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. It was fine. That's the best you're gonna get from me on that. It was like, yeah, it was a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but it wasn't like super Romeo and Juliet. It was just, it was fine. It wasn't great. Eh. Then Aurora Burning, which was the second book in the Aurora something series by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This was awful compared to the first book. I really liked the first book. I hated the second book. And then Jay Kristoff just comes out as more and more of a problematic author. So I'm trying to stay away from the books that he writes. So separating myself from him. I may finish out this series if I can eventually find a used book for the third one. Next up at number 16 was All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace, and this book was hot garbage. Hot, burning, stinky garbage. I do not recommend it. And then at 20 was Raybearer by Jordan Franco, which I talked about in the debut section, and this was a fantastic book. It doesn't really read like young adult, and it's very, very good. The last two categories, which was middle grade and children's, I skipped because I don't like middle grade books, and then picture books because, while I appreciate picture books for the target audience of young children, I am not a young children, nor do I have young children, and I don't even begin to know how to rate a picture book. So, final statistics. 4 of the winners I felt like should be winners. 10 of the winners I felt like other books in that category did it much better. And then 1 category had no winner, and then 5 categories I didn't rate. So, as previously expected, it's a popularity contest, and read the books in the categories that sound interesting to you. Expand your reading taste to different genres other than the one that you normally read. And that's it for this one. I will be back at the end of the month, maybe in December, to talk about the books that I plan to read for the 2021 Goodreads Choice Awards in all of the categories other than fantasy, which you will see multiple videos about that this month. Anyway, that's it. Talk to you later. Bye.